Hello and welcome everybody to the Casual Spikes podcast, episode 24. And I would say that there's something special about it, but it's not. We're just back finally after I've died
Yes.
for 2 weeks.
Yes. Dakota's done dying. We're finally back. We can actually record again.
We are so in there. I am in there like 1980s swimwear.
Yes, I wasn't going to say it. I was hoping you weren't going to say it either, but once again, you've disappointed me.
Hey, look at that, finger guns. Pew, pew, pew. Don't worry, I live in Ohio. You don't need a concealed carry.
And folks, this is the last episode. Crazy that this happened already.
I know. Hey, we're Ohio guys. Of course, of course, we say that you got Ohio anytime something bad happens to you.
Anyway, we're here to talk about what's going on in Standard, what to take in Standard, what to be prepared for Standard, all that fun Standard talk.
You would be exactly correct. But there's only one thing that we need to do, because I'm just gonna get it out of the way completely before I end up forgetting. Is doing some of the shilling host responsibility stuff. So, since it's been a while since I've done it, bear with me here. All right. So, if you are interested in viewing other content from either of us, because we're both getting pretty heavy into Standard as we kind of get into the swing of the Standard RCQ season, you can go ahead and subscribe to either of our channels. Our channels are both going to be linked in the description down below. Hopefully you're watching this on the Casual Spikes YouTube channel, because if you're not, report the channel, because chances are it's not either of us. Off the rip, that is something that can happen, theoretically speaking. But you can subscribe to either of us. That support does go a long way here. We're trying to grow this channel as kind of like our a collaboration, if you will. Yeah, I guess that's really it. I don't think there's any other stuff.
No,
I thought there was more.
no. I say, if you like to support us, go to our individual channels. To do that, there'll be links down in the description below, as always. And then try to subscribe and like on this video as well. Let us know what you guys are playing in Standard. I keep trying to get people to tell me what they're playing in Standard. No one wants to tell me what they're playing in Standard. I just want conversations. I want to talk about Standard. This is the first time in like 6 years I've actually want to talk about Standard, because it's finally in a really good place and it matters. And no one wants to talk about Standard.
That is very true, and I've been looking. I mean, Foundations has been awesome. Standard's been good. Like before that, and I dabbled a little bit in it, but I've just kind of gone full force into, doing different things on Arena, playing different decks on Moto. It's been a lot of fun.
Turns out Boros Charm is still one hell of a card.
That is true. That is like the only charm out of every single charm that's ever been printed that like holds up to today's standards.
Yes, it's kind of wild that like no charm has been able to stay relevant through the years besides Boros, because 4 damage to the face is real good.
True.
There's some other text on that card too, but it says 4 damage for 2 mana and
I
distance speed.
I've actually watched I think watching Corey play. He's like, I'm gonna attack with this, and if it just auto passes, I'm giving my thing double strike, and if it doesn't, I'm just leaving it up to protect my creature.
That's fair. You do get double strike sometimes, but like 95% of the time, you just deal 4 damage. You know how great it is when you get your opponent down to 4 life and you're dead on board, and like, oh cool, there's no burn spell that does 4 damage. And it's like, you would think that, wouldn't you? Boros Charm off the top.
The burn, honestly, I mean, with Foundations, and we talked about some of the cards that we were excited for and everything a few weeks ago at this point from that episode. But the burn got like a major upgrade in a like in a color that was already bordering on being like the best full stop for aggro decks. So the burn only got better, and actually made it a conversation of like, now we're not playing a bunch of creatures. The few good burn spells we have and the best pump spell, now there's a consideration of like, how many creatures do we cut so we can play all this burn.
Yeah.
So, definitely interesting.
I don't think the best Boros deck has been figured out yet, but it's definitely getting closer and closer by the day.
True. And hopefully here, after we hopefully civil arguments here. Yes, I do think that my tier 3 aggro deck is a lot better than the tier 1 aggro decks. People just aren't playing it and giving it a chance.
You're wrong. It's okay.
I swear, mono green aggro will be so much better after everything else gets banned.
Yeah.
So we're
After we ban basic mountain, mono green aggro is will be the aggro deck, guys. I promise.
we're gonna kind of, for this episode, talk a little bit about the early metagame of Foundations. You know, we've only had it for a few weeks at this point, like officially, and it's been making a pretty big impact on the standard format. So we're gonna kind of talk about the standard metagame, kind of give our thoughts on like what we think are like the best decks in a pretty diverse metagame where it seems like you can play just about any macro archetype of the format. I mean, mid range and aggro heavily represented, but you do have the combo, tempo, and control decks that are putting up some pretty good results as well.
Yes. Also notate when we talk about our best decks, like because we'll probably go over probably what we think is like the top 5 best decks. This is in no particular order. We're not saying like so if we name off like Domain as the first deck that we talk about for top 5, we don't think Domain is the best deck in the format. We just think that it's in the top 5, and I don't think it's in the top 5.
Yeah, it's probably not there,
Yeah,
at least in my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's why I said Domain because I don't think anyone's putting that in their top 5 besides the Domain delusionist.
Domain delusion.
Steven.
Stop it. It's illegal. No, I'm kidding. All right. But yeah, I mean, we have a few. I should probably go pull up the metagame page here. I'll get a little bit darker. The standard metagame, kind of what I would think from standards past, where I think a lot of the times when you have standards that like rotate and aren't nearly as big as what we have now, we're in unprecedented territories. But when you have smaller metagames, I think aggro decks tend to kind of shoot towards the top of the metagame. I think it's kind of people's preferred thing, and you don't really see a whole lot of mid-range decks. But as you kind of expand, mid-range gets a lot better and usually ends up outpacing the field in like these bigger metagames. So with a huge standard format right now, plus Foundations being a pretty big set in its own right, and a pretty deep card pool that's going to be around for a few years, mid-range, maybe unexpectedly or expectedly, in my case, is one of the top archetypes, or at least the most played archetypes being played right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I said this back when I was talking about Worlds, where I said I thought the mirror mid range is going to be a huge bump at Worlds because Magic players like choices,
Mm-hmm.
and like for for the better part of like Legacy, Delver decks were always like the most played deck because you get to play Brainstorm, Preordain, Ponder, all these cards that let you like cycle through, get the most options, the most value, the most things you can be. You're taking the most number of game actions you can, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, and that's what the mirror mid range allow to happen. The same thing with now Guardian mid range is you take a whole bunch of game actions and you have like no game's the same, and you're always like, well, I know I play 12 removal spells, I play 15 creatures, I play this many of this. This is what's going to get me out of this position. This is what's going to get me out of this position. And you have all these options to where like you are almost like a toolbox style deck where you're not like you have game against everything, right? To where if and obviously it's like any other deck. If you draw 16 lands straight, you're not going to win against anything.
Mm-hmm.
Your opponent playing their tier 3 homeroom deck is going to beat you because you drew 16 lands straight. Like you're just going to suck. It is what it is. But you have game against everything. It's just whether or not you can draw to it in time or get to it in time or maximize your play correctly to eke out your 5% victory points that you needed type deal. And so it's no surprise that like the two mid-range decks are probably like the biggest or the most played because they have game against everything. Now obviously I would still argue that they're fairly weak to the aggro decks. Aggro is definitely still very dominant, and we see it ticking down tournaments all the time, whether it's the challenges or doing well at the Columbus 10K, the SCG Con 10K that we just had. Didn't take it down, but it still did well. Things like that. So it's like not surprising that like that deck is still well, but it has games against all of it. You're not 0% against any deck in the format.
Yeah, and
Which is
yeah.
okay.
No, go ahead.
I said, which is where you want to be though if you're going into any unknown field, right? Like if I'm going into an unknown RCQ or an unknown like bigger tournament, I want to be on a deck that has 50% against everything compared to a deck that is 100% against three decks and 0% against the rest of the field. Unless I know that the field's going to be just those three decks.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not willing to, because I honestly, like the more kind of the metagame moves on, I really like Dimir, especially while the aggro decks are trying to figure out if they're trying to be more creature still, if they're trying to maybe be a little bit more burn heavy than having just the creature package. I definitely lean towards like the Dimir mid range and just the issue that I have with like mid-range decks overall is the fact that you do end up devolving into this game where you're in a top deck war, and while your top decks are great, I would say typically a lot better than whatever the other aggro player or whatever could draw, unless it's a lethal burn spell, that you a lot of the time just end up drawing kind of like the weaker side of cards, or lands. You know, you end up being in kind of a bad spot where I almost feel like Dimir mid-range plays a lot like the Esper mid-range decks, before, I can't remember exactly what Pro Tour was, where Domain ended up winning, unsurprisingly.
Are you talking about like the Rafine?
Yeah, like the Esper Rafine decks where they just kind
Okay.
of play these small, like little disruptive creatures, and then you end up kind of like filtering your hand where, you know, you didn't have to discard two or three spells to like put three counters on this creature. It was like just fine if you like drew three cards, discard three lands. It doesn't matter. I just drew a bunch of action, and that's kind of where, to me, the Dimir midrange deck kind of breaks the symmetry. That I really like it is the fact that its thing to draw a bunch of cards is fairly resilient, and I've even seen some copy or like some decks playing Gix even still in the main deck as like another way of just being able to draw additional cards. Now a little bit worse against the aggro decks, but you know,
Yeah.
still I just kind of like it in the sense of like if this thing sticks around and it's very resilient. Most of the removal in the format is just destroy base removal. The exile base removal doesn't hit the enduring curiosity. That to me, I like to give the nod over Dimir midrange, but that is also not an endorsement of this is definitely better than Golgari, because if it was flat out better, I don't think people would bother necessarily playing Golgari unless the green was just that impactful.
Agreed. So I'm obviously in the camp where I think Golgari mid range is the better mid range deck. I think so. Like my argument is that Glissa is one hell of a card,
True.
and she solves the problem that Domir mid range has, where it doesn't have any kind of answers to like the mono white or the caretaker's talent deck that's running around or domain. To where like yes, Domir can definitely go under domain. I'm not saying it can't, and no one's saying it can't. But the problem is like Domir, if it goes into like that longer game against like domain or caretakers, it loses. It can easily lose because it doesn't have any answers to the enchantments that are so powerful. Golgari getting easy answers to the enchantments with Glissa that they already want to play, Terra Thunder, which is already a good removal spell, and things like that, I think gives it the edge. And then it also gets to play like the demon chalice package. The I can't think of the door.
Archfiend plus oh shoot. Yeah, of course now I can't remember the name of it. The
Yeah,
Unholy Annex.
yeah, Unholy Annex, which is just a kill spell by its like or not sorry not a kill spell, a clock by itself, and just is a good 6/6 creature and a like just a way to stay ahead with the draw. So I think that just like being able to have that puts it in a better camp in my opinion. And like the one thing that Demir has over it, they they have answers to the problematic creature it already has, like their 4 mana enchantment creature. Like they're able to answer that creature without trying too hard. So I think that's what's I think it's what's giving Golgari an edge in the mid range fight we see between Demir and Golgari.
Oh, the streams of Steel and Oil is pretty slick. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that Gogori definitely probably has some like better tools, but at least for me, like Dimir kind of solves what I think is like the typical mid-range problem of like I almost feel like I never have enough cards, or I get to a point where I've 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 my opponent enough to where I'm completely out of gas. I'm kind of top decking at this point, so I definitely lean towards like the deck that has the potential for more cards overall over the course of a game. But
That's fair.
again, I'm not willing again to that, and I think like the counter like the just the dumb random like counter spells in the deck too that are just like, oh hey, like my Gruul opponent top decked or whoever, like Boros Charm, all these other things where Golgari just kind of has to like take it on the chin, where Dimir at least has some spots where it's like, okay, I can fit this in my curve and like play this to take a card, then counter that, and they have a little less going on. So, but like I said, I'm not married to the idea of Dimir or Golgari being better than the other. I just think they both have like basically as you're saying, they both kind of have their tools to attack the metagame. I think they both do it very well. It just depends if you want to have more potential draw or just like an on average like better threats.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also what gives Golgari like that's what puts Golgari in a better position. In my opinion, like your average draw is just better. Like in the mid to late game, like I'd much rather draw a Caustic Bronco over like a Spygrass Siren. Like one of these can still like draw me cards even if it attacks into a suicide mission, like without anything else on the board. It's like if we're both sitting at 6 lands, no permanents, you get the permanents, and I play Caustic Bronco, I'm going to draw a card from it attacking no matter what.
And that's when you flip on Holy Annex. I'm gonna attack
Don't
with
hurt,
this. All right, take 8.
don't hurt me like that.
I'm not saying that it'll happen all the time. I'm just saying that it'll happen once and it'll be at the worst possible time.
Probably. Going over, I think let's go over the aggro decks because there's technically like 4 big aggro decks, but really like one.
I mean 2.
Yeah,
There's
so I mean, so so right now, like if you go on to like Goldfist's like standard metagame breakdown, it has like Boros Burn, Gruul Prowess, and Mono Red Prowess. Realistically, I think Gruul Prowess is on its way out. The biggest reason to play Gruul is quite literally for Questing Druid for its adventure part, and that's really the only reason to play green because Boros just has gotten so much better with having the Lightning Helix, which gives you lifelink, or like not trying to lifelink, but life gain, as well as being a removal spell. You have Boros Charm, which is good to keep your creatures, indestructible, give something double strike, give some or deal 4 damage to the face, as well as the other like white cards that are decent. Like we've seen some different like protection spells, and then having like Rest in Peace in the sideboard to just have edge against anything doing any kind of graveyard shenanigans. Zori's Oculus. Or anything like that. So I do think that, like, realistically, you're playing either like Mono Red Prowess or Boros Burn, and I don't honestly understand the point of playing Mono Red Prowess when Boros is just so much more efficient and not nearly like a price intimidating problem.
Yeah, I would say probably Mono Red because I don't think Boros typically plays like Witchstalker Frenzy, which I've been calling Witchstalker Talent for whatever reason. No clue why.
Yes, Boros doesn't normally play it, but it could definitely fit it in at 75. It would not be like super challenging to. I mean, that is like, and like I understand why they do it. Like it's cute when you get to deal 5 because you dealt 5 to your Screaming Nemesis type thing. But also, like, I don't know if it's needed with just the pure value that Boros Burn has right now.
Yeah, I think it really just depends. I think for a lot of people, like Boros is very attractive. You have all the mana fixing that you need to, like, be able to support 2 colors. Boros Charm, like Boros Charm Helix and Bolt Wave is just like very hard to argue against playing those cards because it's very reminiscent of like Modern Burn, where Bolt Wave is essentially like Lava Spike. You're basically just missing like a thoroughbred lightning bolt, and unfortunately, was it the kicker burn spell?
Oh,
Burst lightning kind of has to like play that role of like sometimes it's worse than it's just essentially a little bit better of a shock, from time to time. Which I did have it actually come up where I I had top deck Burst Lightning, kick it, deal 4, untap, draw Burst Lightning, kick it, deal 4, win the game. So I mean, it does come up. It is definitely better.
I say it came up in when I went to the Columbus 10K, like being able to, like, like they had stonewalled me on like being able to attack my creatures, like removing them, and I just like all right, cool, end of turn, Burst Lightning kicked you, like that's 4 damage, top deck another burn spell, kill you. Like you're at
Hmm.
7. Like I was able to kill you with 2 burn spells. And so this is like, oh cool, a shock. I need like 3 more burn spells now to like still win this game.
Hmm. And I'm sure too, at least for like if you just play mono red as well, like you theoretically avoid like any damage that your mana base could do to you, aka like the 4 battlefield forge or whatever that you play. Like, does it really
Mhm.
matter? Probably not, but I'm sure that
You get like small percentage points, right? Like your lands are never going to come in and play tapped. Like you're never going to have like theoretically you're never having mana problems unless like I kept a 1 land hand and never drew a second land.
you've never played a deck that plays 4 rock face village, because I tell you what, that is like the
I
worst land.
refuse.
You
I
need to
refuse to
play
play
it.
4 of those. 4 of those.
You need to play it because it ends up being like really good. But I've had so many games where it's like I've drawn 3 lands and 2 of them are rock face villages and one's a mountain, and it's like I so badly want to go lightning strike shock or like burst lightning strike, whatever, like combination of cards, and I just can't because I have 1 mountain. But don't worry, I can cast all the other creatures in my deck. I can give one of my creatures haste and, do the valiant thing, but I can't cast my burn spells.
Now I also have like this weird idea that I think Emberheart Challenger is kind of bad.
Don't massacre my boy like that.
So I think it's good in the mono red prowess deck because like yeah, but like I really like what these burn like the Boros burns has been doing like with
Hmm.
playing Hired Claw, Monster Swift Spear, Slick Shot Show Off, Screaming Nemesis. I think like that's where you want to be. I think that's just way better than anything else you could be doing.
Yeah,
Like
being in a standard format now, where Slick Shot actually feels like a really good card now.
yeah, I'm also so I'm gonna just say this. I think that any deck playing 3 Screaming Nemesis over 4 should just be playing the 4th one. Like, there's a reason that cards now, I think, up to at the time of recording this is up to like $30 right now, and it's because people finally realize that having a 3 mana can't be blocked, and if it does get blocked, it just makes them not be able to have. You're gonna do 1 more damage than your 3 damage more would have done most of the time, or you're gonna stop them from gaining life, which is huge against like most of the decks. That's the only way decks have to survive against the mono red at this point is like you have to gain life, right? Like you
Hmm.
see Golgari having a way to gain life. Jimmy Range arguably doesn't have a way to gain life. Like its way to gain life is attacking with Jeet Cavern Bat a lot and hoping that like your maps get to make it into a 3/3 or 4/4 or killing them fast enough.
Hmm.
But like every deck basically has a way to gain life because of how prevalent now the burn spells are and the aggro decks are. Like before, like we go back just a little bit before foundations and such, like you could easily beat the burn decks or like the aggro decks. They weren't even burn decks. Like, you could beat the aggro decks because all right, I have 3 creatures on the field. They're all like X3s or bigger. I have 3 removal spells in my hand. There's literally no way I lose this game unless I have an aneurysm and pass out.
Hmm.
Like this is how I lose the game. And it's like now it's like all right, there's Stonewalled on the ground. I got 3 removal spells in my hand and double Boros Charm. I'm dead. Well, I didn't plan for that. Like, you have to now have life gain too. And so, like, I just think that Screaming Nemesis is probably the best card in these decks that people just don't want to admit is the best card.
Yeah, definitely a card that I think in Pioneer, because I mean I really wasn't even thinking of it standard at the time. Like Pioneer, I was like, this could probably be like an okay like role player. Like this could do something. And then now in standard, like absolutely, I think Slickshot Show Off has become one of the best red creatures. If you're focusing more on like this burn strategy, we still have a really good pump spell in the like Monstrous Rage that ends up dealing a ton of damage. We talked about Boros Charm, Bolt Wave, all these things. Like it that makes Slickshot very good because that's what made Slickshot really good in Modern and Pioneer. Now like you're not married to playing the mice package anymore. So like even then, like Screaming Nemesis, whether you're playing the mice or you're just like going in on Slick Shot and like these more spell based, it's still one of your best creatures for that reason of it's either unblocked or it's like causing like very awkward blocks to where even if your opponent blocks with a 1/1, they still take one, and that doesn't even have to go to them. It can go to another creature and potentially finish off like another creature where you have two creatures that bounce, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like the Nemesis picks it off after beating another creature in combat.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely one of those creatures where it's just really good. And like, so if you're gonna pick up the like Boros Prowess or anything like that, um, a lot of what you want to do is you're saving your burn for when you want like to burn out your opponent at this point. Like, so I was playing Boros Mice package when I went to Columbus, the 10K, and there's a lot of times where I just had like, so I have obviously have like the Manifold Mouse and like those shenanigans going, and so it's just like, all right, cool. I was like, all right, they're at 11. All right, cool. I'm going to win now in the next 2 turns, because at the end of their turn, I'm going to cast like two or three burn spells, and then I'm going to untap and cast 2 or 3 more burn spells, and now they've lost the game. Like, it's great. Like, they could board wipe right now and then have like 23 removal spells that all cost 0 mana in their hand. Doesn't matter. I've now gotten them to 11 life. They are dead because of the cards in my hand. And like, that is now the power that we have seen with, you know, the Boros burn or even the mono red burn, like prowess decks, is that they have enough burn accumulated now that they don't need to rely on creatures as heavily. Obviously, if you can remove all their, you still want to remove their creatures, because that's like, it's the same thing as you see when you know, when you go to modern burn, where like they still rely on their creatures to get just enough chip damage in there to like, oh, we got 5-6 damage in, cool, we're gonna kill you now because we got that 5-6 damage. That's not 2 to 3 more cards I need to play.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely right. The mono, like not mono red, the just like aggro decks in particular, 90% of them just being red based. You're basically just like ironing out numbers, like what lands do I want to play, and then what potential like sub theme, you know. And is Boros probably the best one? Probably. I was telling Randy earlier that it feels like Monstrous Rage plus like Boros Charm feels like the Become Immense Temur Battle Rage of Standard right now, because you just end up dealing like 16 damage or something like that with a Slick Shot Show Off with Monstrous Rage Temur Battle, or Monstrous Rage Boros Charm, and even like some of your other like dumb little creatures, like even a Swift Spear goes up to 3 power from just the prowess, and then, you know, 6 power. I mean, that's 12 double striking trample damage, you know. That's pretty good.
Oh yeah, and then let's not forget about the Jeskai Convoke, or Jeskai Aggro, as it for some reason continuously gets called. The
Yep.
Jeskai Convoke list is another deck that does extremely well, that I think is probably like I think you said it in your video earlier this week, like a dark horse essentially. And I think that's probably the best way to describe this deck, because it's very underplayed. Like, if you look at the like last 7 days for the metagame, it's, you know, 3.2% of the meta only having 20 copies in the challenges and things of that nature. Um, but it is very powerful, and it does. So a lot of decks are focusing on like single removal spells, right? Because you're trying to, you know, you're trying to kill Slick Shot Show Off, you're trying to kill the early little 1 drops. Great. My deck is just playing a bunch of 2-for-1 creatures that are either making things, or I'm killing an artifact to make 3/1/1 tokens. That's great that you have, you know, 5, or you have, you know, 5 or 6 removal spells in your opening hand. Cool. They all cost more than my creatures, and I'm going to deal more damage because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jeskai Aggro is really well positioned against the mid range decks right now, because the way they want to fight these burn decks is not good to fighting Jeskai Aggro or Jeskai Convoke. I mean, this is the same thing we saw when the Convoke deck broke onto the scene in Pioneer, like 2.5 years ago now, where none of the metagame is prepared for it, because they have to play removals, or they have to play mass removal for this. Mass removal is not really good in this format right now, unless you're, you know, the Caretaker's Talent deck, where you want mass removal, but like, you want your creatures to stick. You're trying to beat down. Like, every deck is trying to reduce our opponent's life total to 0. Whether it's the combo decks, the tempo decks, the control decks, the mid range decks, are all trying to go take our opponent from 20 to 0. These are their options. And so nobody's playing mass removal because they want their creatures to stick around. They're just playing other creatures either being better than their opponent's creatures, or I'm playing removal spells so my creature's going to stick around when their creatures are down. And so, with that being said, Jeskai Convoke is just doing so well positioned, because it doesn't care about its creatures dying. I'm gonna make, you know, 15 creature. Well, not 15. Let's be a little. I'm gonna make, you know, 6-7 creatures by turn 3. Mm. It's great that you have, you know, removal spells that cost 2 mana. Do you want to kill my 1/2? I would like you to kill my 1/2. I'm gonna attack for 6, by the way. You want to kill that 1/2? All right, you take 5. and still chipping you for a fourth of your life total. Like, and so I think, and it's explosive too with the recruiter.
Yep,
Just,
Imidane
yeah,
Recruiter.
with having imminent recruiter, you're just able to come out of the gate pretty fast. You can set up a board state, and then like you get in these weird spots where like, okay, yeah, I have like 12, 1-1s or 1-2s. Like, all right, well now I'm gonna slam Emine's recruiter, and now they're all 2 power, and now it's actually a real threat that I'm attacking with. I'm attacking for 30 damage now, and you only have a couple blockers.
Yeah, it definitely goes wide enough. It goes wider than what a lot of other people can do to like gum up the ground while they're playing like a 4-mana 6/6, which is great. That's awesome for one card, but when you're casting essentially 2 or 3 spells a turn from like turn 2 onward, ideally, and you're getting the card advantage going, and even like your like case of the Gateway Express, a lot of times like your opponent's using like their removal on like your tokens or your creatures that you already got a little bit of value out of, and that's fine, but even then they can't keep all those creatures off the board, meaning then like case of the Gateway Express come on, boom, get rid of their biggest creature, attack with a bunch of them, whatever, you lose 2 of them, they're going to get a power buff now, and then now they have to worry about Imidane's Recruiter getting slammed down to give them even more power, to where they took a chunk of their life total. Their targeted removal is not really going to get them out of it. Creatures on board are going to have to do a lot of work to try to get them out of it. And then eventually when you get tokens up to like 3-4 power, they're going to end up trading with those physical cards anyway, while they're not having to commit anymore to the board. So it's just a deck that probably will beat itself. Unfortunately, I've played a few matches with it, and I've lost more games because my opponent did play a few removal spells, and then it just happens. Sometimes it happens, but a lot of the games where I did play, it felt very powerful. Playing the Knight Errant of Eos on like turn 2 and setting up like Recruiter on turn 3, or even just getting like value off of like Warden of the Inner Sky, making it huge. Sheltered by Ghost being another card that people are really picking up. Like getting a Warden up to like 3-4 counters on it, and then putting a Shelter by Ghost on it, and being able to like gain so much life and also put pressure on the opponent as well, has been absolutely awesome. And then the Ward 2 on it is just insane.
Oh yeah.
But this deck's cool. I hope it's good. I would really like to play it.
I'm waiting for the Boros decks to realize that they should pick up Sheltered by Ghost.
Don't tell them. I'm editing that out.
Talking to a bunch of players because I ran into the mirror match, or the pseudo mirror match of like I played into Boros or in the aggro decks when I was at the SCG Con 10K in Columbus, and someone who I lost to, they were playing mono red. They just kind of drew a little bit better than me. Could not find my 3rd land in game 3 to win the game. It was very disappointing. We're on turn like 4 or 5, and we just did not find our 3rd land. But he was talking about his one friend was crunching the numbers and figuring out how many 1-drops he needed to play to consistently be able to go 1-drop into Sheltered by Ghost on turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
Consistently enough, or like he had it up to like an 80% consistency rate. Like obviously, depending on he had both Shelter by Ghost and enough 1-drops to do this.
Yeah.
Because it just beats the aggro mirror matches. Like if you slam turn 2 Shelter by Ghost, you're eating their 1-drop, and now you have a creature with lifelink, and you're so far ahead of the game. It's not like you cannot keep up.
I wonder if playing like the Lizard gets a lot better too, playing Shelter by Ghost.
Yeah, I think as it stands right now, I'm going to go look and see if I can get some Shelter by Ghost, because I think that's what I'm going to try to take to an RCQ this coming weekend.
Spoiler
for people who will not see this in time to be prepared.
True, but also spoilers.
Yes. But I do think that that's going to be the next iteration of Boros Burn, or Boros Aggro, whatever you want to call it. With that out of the way, you want to move into control, tempo, or combo?
We can kind of look at probably the control decks, just because we have more of that than the other two. I think before we like officially move on, I think we can kind of both agree that whether it's like the 2 mid-range decks, or either like aggro variant or Jeskai Convoke, I think we're kind of set on most of these decks. Probably maybe Jeskai can be left out of it, but red based aggro, Dimir or Golgari mid range, like those are just like if you immediately want to like compete. I at least I think that those are probably the best decks if you're looking to snag an RCQ win like right now.
Yeah, I would argue that if you want to like theoretically saying that you are an accomplished Magic player in the sense of you understand how decks work, you understand how to play the metagame type situation, I think that you could pick up Golgari. I think you could pick up Dimir mid range and either like Mono Red or Boros, or I would even argue Jeskai aggro and probably just be able to take down an RCQ relatively easily, depending on draws and variance and luck. But like saying that you are accomplished enough to understand to like look at a deck, understand how it works, and then pick it up and play it, you should be able to take down an RCQ with any one of those decks.
Yeah, just for all the reasons we mentioned before, I think that with as much aggro as we've seen in the format, Black has the best removal for it. So you're better off playing like the mid range decks, and if you'd rather like put the onus on your opponent, just play the aggro decks. And like even with all the really good efficient removal in the format, like the red based aggro decks are just I don't, they're monsters, man. Like the red aggro decks are just monsters.
They are. There is a reason why I decided to register a Boros aggro, Boros burn, for the 10K. And my exact argument was I want to put my opponent into the driver's seat, or into the hot seat essentially. We're like, hey man, that's cool that you decided to build this new deck. I really hope that you had a game plan for aggro, because if you didn't, I'm going to run over you. And that's basically what I did for a lot of my opponents, a lot of my wins. Just like I put them in an early position, they had to have answers. And when you don't have answers, you've already lost. And when they had the answers, I had the burn spells to follow it up with. It's like, all right, cool. You had the answers for the creatures. Do you have the life gain? Oh, you don't have the life gain. Okay, cool. You're gonna die then. Like, you need to have both of these, and when you misstep and don't have one or the other, you're going to lose. And that's like, I think that's why the Boros Burn is probably the easiest and safest deck to pick up right now. Where it's just like, as long as you're not an idiot and don't like play into just like obvious removal or obvious things, like you'll be fine. And like now with all the burn spells, you can play this like weird game where like, all right, your opponent's you're clearly pulling up, removal spells. Don't play into them. Make them waste their turn. You have burn spells you can still play. Like, all right, cool. I'm gonna bolt you for 3 then and pass turn. Now you have to hold up mana again because you can't afford to play a creature and hold up mana. Cool. I'm gonna pass my turn again then. We'll just keep playing this weird game, and eventually I'm just gonna keep drawing burn spells and kill you, and you're going to have to pull the trigger and put a creature or tap out, and then when you do, I'm going to play a bunch of spells. And this is like the great thing about Slickclack Show Off now, too, is you can just plot that. All right, cool, I'm going to plot this. I'm glad you held up 2 mana. I did something with my turn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pass, and by the way, your 2 mana is useless. So I'm glad you held up like that removal spell, but I advanced my board state without advancing my board state and making you essentially time walk yourself.
Oh, yeah. And, yeah, I mean, everything's crazy. Is the format, and the format is great, even with these being like the most played decks in the format, essentially. Minus Jeskai Convoke, because we said it had a pretty low metagame share. They're just
a dark horse.
Yeah, they're really good. They have different things that make them very special little babies in my heart, and like I said, can't go wrong really with playing any of them, and really any of the other decks we're going to mention here too, because like I said, the standard metagame goes pretty deep. I think that there's at least one good deck in every like macro archetype that you could play, and as long as you kind of know what's going on, especially with like these decks that we're about to name, you could probably end up taking down like the mid-range decks. Yeah, well, RCQ, taking down like the mid-range decks or the aggro decks, because obviously they're seeing play because they have one option or another against some or all of these decks.
Yep. So I'm going to place a caveat on the next 3 archetypes we're going to talk about: the control, the tempo, and the combo decks. So where we kind of said that you could kind of basically pick up any of the mid-range or the aggro decks, I would argue that these decks are going to take you a little bit more time, or you want to kind of understand your role in each position before you just try to pick it up and go. So we're talking about control first. So I think I'm going to talk about the lesser control deck in my opinion, or the deck that is worse in my opinion for the control matchup, which would be like Domain. So right now, Domain has shifted from what it used to be, where we were seeing it play a bunch of there we go, Archangel, the Wrath, Atraxa, things like that. We're now switched over to like more of an enchantment based domain, and it's all because of Zur Internal Schemer. So he's a 1/4 flying creature for Esper colors, white, blue, black. He has enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And then for a white and a colorless or generic, you can target non-aura enchantment you control because a creature adjacent to each other types has a base power and toughness equal to its mana value. So then, of course, obviously, we're playing a bunch of the Floodlords, or Overlords, sorry, not. So, we can put them in for their impending cost, and then while they're in impending, we can turn them into creatures, and now they become, we're playing the the blue Overlord, the Flood Pits. So we get to draw 2 and then just cut a card. We can make it into a 5/5 with lifelink. Overlord of the Huntwoods, obviously a good one because it mana ramps us. It fixes our domain debt, so we can make our Leyline Bindings good. We can turn that into a 5/5 with lifelink. Same thing with the Overlord of Mistwars. We're playing that because we can turn that into a 7/7 with lifelink. Same thing by turning into our Leyline Bindings into 6/6 creatures, and Zur gives all these creatures also hexproof, so you can't target them. You have to kill the Zur first. So it just makes it gives more of an edge to the Domain deck. That being said, I still think Domain is a real bad dog against the aggro decks. Like, when you're just killing your opponent by turn 4, that's great that you have a Zur.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to make sure you have... Also, you need to have played an Overlord of the Huntwoods so you can activate Zur on turn 4. Because you got that extra mana on turn 3. Like, it is just a lot more work for this deck to run. Now, obviously, it's still not terrible. The big draw to playing Domain, if you want to play it, is that you expect a lot of more mid-range decks, because this deck can definitely beat up on the mid-range decks. It has a whole bunch of value in all the Overlords. You're still playing, good removal spells. You still have Up the Beanstalk for your value there. The deck's not terrible. It's just a lot different than what we saw in past Standard. In past Standard, and then it's also just a lot more acceptable to the aggro decks because the aggro decks are just so much better than what they were.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. With that analysis, I've played against the unfortunately Domain deck a few times, playing the aggro decks, and yeah, I mean, you essentially kind of lose the game if they ever get enough mana to Zur plus make an Overlord into an aura, because then they just immediately gain that 5 life. If they play the Overlord of the Hauntwoods. So it's definitely your kind of have the onus put on you to put a bunch of pressure on your opponent and force them to have like that line of play. And even if they're on the play, like there's still a good chance that they could just die from slick shot stuff plus burn spells and things like that.
Yeah, it is definitely it comes down a lot to like game 1. I think that you're probably like I want to say it's almost probably 70% in favor of the burn deck, because you're not going to keep a super aggressive hand for like removing creatures and stuff if you don't think you're playing against burn or against the aggro deck. So like if you keep more of like a middling hand, or like, all right, this hand's pretty good against any kind of mid-range deck, you're just going to like get run over on game 1. Game 2 and 3 is where like you have like most of like your ability to play into it. Then you have like your sideboard cards are going to help you, things like that. So like it makes way more sense why like those games are going to be where you're going to win. But I just think your game 1 is so bad against aggro that it kind of makes it hard for me to justify playing this deck as a whole. And then like also it's a pricier deck to play for Standard. Like we're looking on average like this deck is like a $400 or $500 deck, when I can just go play, a $200-$300 deck and be good against, like, have a 50% chance against most of the metagame. As to where, like, this deck definitely is not close to 50% against aggro.
Yeah.
And we just talked about how good aggro is.
Very true. Domain, we put it in the control category for a reason, because it's kind of like the game plan. It really wants to, at least I feel like it wants to be against most of the matchups and stuff. And it's a deck that I don't think you can mulligan hands that function like that you just get to do things where if it's like, oh, I play a Beanstalk on 2 and then I have the ability to Leyline Binding on 3, to get rid of a threat, and then also get to draw a card and just kind of do my thing, or Impending Overlord on turn 3. Like, it's very hard to mulligan hands like that, and maybe it's of a more disciplined player where it's like, hey, I am in a more aggro meta, but that also is just like, I'm mulliganing a hand that, has 5 mana on turn 3 or on turn 4 after getting to draw an additional card and then unlocking my deck's full potential by then, and you're mulliganing that because, well, I might be playing against Slick Shot Show Off, Screaming Nemesis, Boros Charm, or something like that. Like that just, I think that you have to be willing to, if you play the Domain deck, where, if you have a 7-card hand and it's a reasonable 7-card hand, it's good. It just might not be good against like the aggro decks or a certain deck in the format. Then you just don't play it. You have to be okay with losing to the aggro deck sometimes when you have the Beanstalk into Overlord of the Hauntwoods draws.
Yeah. Also notably too, like I think the biggest problem with this deck is that most of these decks are playing about 10 surveil, or is it surveil?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 10 of the surveil lands. So like you're playing 26 lands, 10 of which are coming into play tapped every time, which is kind of huge. And like when we're in this like more aggro meta. Now, obviously, if you plan to play against a bunch of mid-range decks, 10 Surveil lands is amazing. You're going to be filtering your draw so well. You're not going to be, you're theoretically not going to be flooding a lot. All these things are going to be going good for you.
Mm-hmm.
But it sucks a lot when you go, tap land, and your opponent go 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop. Like, oh, wow, I feel real smart for playing this deck.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it is definitely a deck that you have to be comfortable with. Like, hey, you're going to lose a lot of your game ones to the red aggro decks, and you need to be okay with that, or you're not going to have a fun time.
Oh, yeah.
Now, is it impossible for you to beat the red aggro decks game one? Not even slightly. It's not impossible by any means. You were just unfavored 100% for sure.
Yeah, enough about this Domain stuff. Get it off my screen. Get it out of here.
Right. So going to the deck that won the Columbus, or the SCG Con Columbus on Saturday, it's called Mono White Caretaker. I'm just calling it the Caretaker deck. We put it under control because it is a much more slow deck. It's a slow, grindy. We're getting a bunch of value from Caretaker's Talent and Enduring Innocence. It's one of those enchantment creatures that when it dies, it comes back as an enchantment if it wasn't all one already, or if it gets exiled, then obviously it doesn't come back. But this deck is slow, it's grindy, but it gets to play basically the best removal in the format. You get to play Lay Down Arms, which, for any of you who don't know what that is a 1-mana sorcery. Exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. A controller gains 3 life. This player was playing 18 basic planes, so we're almost guaranteed to be able to kill any creature on curve. So if we're on turn 2, we're going to be able to kill a 2-drop, turn 3, kill a 3-drop type situation. Obviously that changes because they were playing 4 Fountain Porch and 3 Sunken Citadel, so if you play one of those, then you're no longer killing a 5-drop on 5 type deal. But with almost all the creatures in the format being 5 and under, you could pretty much kill almost any creature on curve, which is huge for 1 mana. And sure, your opponent gains 3 life, but we don't care about that. We're going to beat them slowly and all at once when we activate Caretaker's Talent into its 3rd hidden mode of turning your tokens into actual creatures.
True.
But, I mean, outside of that, like, it's playing Biza. 4 Bizas in the main for the aggro decks, along with, 4 Lay Down Arms, 4 Get Lost, 2 Soul Partitions, 4 Sunfalls, and we have 4 Carrot Cakes to gain life as well. This deck is made to grind and grind slowly.
True, yeah. And then I'm noticing this here too. This deck list in particular, playing 2 Virtue of Loyalty. So you just like make all your tokens, and then every turn they're just gonna get bigger. And the fact that this untaps them too means that you can also get aggressive while also, having pseudo vigilance as well to make it even harder for your opponent to attack through your creatures because they're gonna be even bigger on defense than they were on offense.
If you want to see how good Virtue of Loyalty is, I just cast it on turn 5 with no creatures in play and just start activating a Fountain Port. You will win that game, almost guaranteedly. It is unreal how powerful Virtue of Loyalty is. I watched it happen in not this deck, but in a black-white version of this deck. That it wasn't playing Caretaker's Talent, but it was playing Virtue of Loyalty, Fountain Porch, and some other cards. And they cast Virtue of Loyalty on an empty board and killed somebody with just Fountain Port tokens. Because the fish just got so big so fast. And being able to play, like you said, pseudo-vigilance, essentially, where like you get to play offense and defense is just huge. Like your opponent already can't keep up because your creatures are being bigger than what they're doing, and it's just now also being able to attack and then still defend.
Also, carrot cake.
Yeah,
carrot cake.
Carrot cake is like so I talked about this in my video. Carrot cake is the most innocuous card I think probably ever printed. Where when you read it, it does not read like a powerful card. So like Carrot Cake is an artifact food for 1 and a white. When it comes into play, and when you sacrifice it, you get a 1/1 white rabbit creature token and you scry 1. And then you have the ability to pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice it, and you gain 3 life. This card reads like a draft chaff. Like, my deck, isn't all the way there. I gotta play some mediocre cards. I guess I'll put this Carrot Cake in. And then you play it, and you're just like, this is way better than it ever should be. And it's so dumb. Like, I don't have a better way to describe it than just to say that it's dumb. Like, the card doesn't read powerful, the card doesn't seem powerful, and then you simply just combine this with Caretaker's Talent or Enduring Innocence, and this card just becomes the gas all the way through.
Oh, yeah.
And even when you, it's even just amazing to cast this on turn 2. You get a blocker, you get to scry, you're setting up your draw next turn. You just get, so much value from this, and it doesn't look like you should. You read this card, and it just does not read yeah, this is a 4 of in, a very powerful standard deck. That is not how this card reads, even slightly. You read the rest of these cards, they all make sense of, why they're in here. We have Enduring Innocence, Biza, Overlord, Elspeth, all the removal spells, Caretaker's Talent, Virtue of Loyalty, all these cards make sense. All these cards, I see how this is powerful. And you read Carrot Cake, and it's this seems like the weakest card. And sometimes it's really trash. When you're super behind on board, this card's trash. But I can point to almost any card in any deck and tell you how trash it is when you're super behind on board. But when you're ahead or even, this card is just so much gas, and this is so much value that it's unreal.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite cards in that draft format to play, and then of course all the synergies and stuff where you just sacrifice it, gaining 3 life. Again in a format where aggro is pretty prevalent. Just to kind of stumble up to Sunfall, or even getting to just play a Biza on the next turn 4 after you just eat the cake on turn 3, making 2 bodies. I mean, there's just a lot that Carrot Cake kind of does to kind of forward this game plan, on top of its synergies with, as you were saying, Enduring Innocence and the actual Caretaker's Talent as well. Just ends up being the worst card when it's by itself, but then with everything else, it's a world beater.
Yeah, and I'll even argue that playing Carrot Cake on turn 2 is not terrible. It's still good. That is a fine turn 2 play, especially for a deck that really doesn't have any turn 2 plays.
Mm-hmm.
Your turn 2 play is Carrot Cake or Virtue of Loyalty, whatever its Avenger half is.
So make it 2/2.
Yeah. Something Festivity or whatever. But yeah, so it's just this is just a great turn 2 play that then sets you up for just your later turns. And it's just, it's I don't know, it's just so funny to me, this card, it definitely seems like you wouldn't want to, it would be okay in draft. Is just yeah, man, this is a card that really helps this deck ridiculously well. It's just so funny to be this card is very eh, and it just turns into yeah, it's great.
Yeah, overall, the mono white deck just looks like it's very annoying to kind of deal with. Black definitely has the best removal spells, but when you're playing mono white, then a lot of the exile things, and they cost a lot more for them to cast. The lay down arms to just outright get rid of them. If you're deciding to actually play the mouse package, guess what? Doesn't matter, because your thing is either getting bounced, losing all of its counters, and you can cast it later for more expensive, or it's just getting exiled straight up.
Yeah, it's just so good. And as someone who's played against this deck from the aggro side of it, you can beat this deck. It is not impossible to beat, but god damn is it a challenge. It is an uphill battle, and you are definitely trying as soon as possible to shock your own Screaming Nemesis to turn off their life gain. Carrot Cake is a hell of an annoying card. The 1/1 blocker and gaining 3 life is just... It's not backbreaking, but it is the most annoying thing to deal with when you do not have your Monstrous Rage to give your creature trample. Like, oh, that's cool, man. You cast like 3 spells and your Swift Spear is like a 7/7. Cool, I'm gonna block with this 1/1 mouse or 1/1 rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna gain 3 life on the way out too. It's like, ah, cool. Why did I play against this again? Why did I choose to play aggro? And I will say, I think the biggest card this got out of Foundations is Authority of Councils to help it against the aggro decks. So, like, the biggest drawback to Lay Down Arms is that it's sorcery. And Wizards knew what they were doing. This needed to be a sorcery card. If this was an instant, I think this deck probably becomes tier 1 overnight. Like, if Wizards just like, what if we for ratted Lay Down Arms to be instant? This deck just shoots up in immediate value. Like, it just immediately goes up in value. And being able to have Authority of Councils now to where, like, your opponent's haste creatures don't matter because they have to come into play tapped.
Mm-hmm.
Your Laid Out Arms now just becomes essentially an instant speed spell.
Yeah, there's a lot of good white cards that got printed, and it turns out like just essentially a mono white control deck is pretty good in this format right now, with all the good removal it gets to play early on.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So I mean, you have some options to play a control deck, and it doesn't necessarily have to be counter spells and 3 steps ahead negates or anything like that. There's just simply good control decks that don't necessarily do control things, if that makes sense.
I would call the mono white Caretaker's deck is basically a tap out control deck. It is a deck that controls the board very well. It gets a lot of value from what it's doing, and it is a tap out version of it where, like, we're not trying to hold up mana and hold up negates and counter spells and things like that. We're just going to control what you're doing. We have removal spells. We have annoying creatures that you like. You wasting a real card on is great for me, and just we're going to value you out.
Agreed.
But I think that's all we have for the control decks as it stands right now.
Yeah, probably one's worth mentioning.
Yeah, control decks that have put up real numbers. I'm sure someone's going to comment, well, actually, guys, I've been playing black-red control, and I know I haven't even 5-0'd anything, but it's definitely better than every other meta decks.
I mean,
you have to trust me.
There's like a deck that says it's Azorius control. It's essentially like this deck, but playing like a Jace, Jace the Perfected Mind, like 3 steps ahead or negates in the sideboard. I mean, it's essentially mono white Caretaker's Talent with like a few blue cards.
I will argue, I think that's where you want to be with this deck. I think you want to have the Jaces and negates in the sideboard. I think it helps you out a lot, and you get to do it for relatively low cost of just playing some Surveil lands instead, and using your Fountain Ports to make blue mana when you need it. Which also triggers your Caretaker's Talent because it turns out a treasure token is still a token.
That is true. Can confirm. Treasure token is a token.
Yes. That being said, do you want to talk about the tempo decks or the combo decks?
The combo deck, because I definitely... I don't know. I have like a little bit of a soft spot for like the one combo deck in the format that we have, just because it's the absurdity of it, right?
Yeah. I like it. I like the deck. I don't actually have any problems with the deck. It's honestly it's so weird that this deck does well to me. Not because it's bad. Like, the deck's not inherently bad, but like when you look at the numbers and you look at how it's made, it is one of those decks where it's just like, I feel like it shouldn't work.
So, for those of you that might not know what we're talking about, it's called Teamer Combo on MTG Goldfish, but it's like this, Valley Flood Call. No, it's like this Valley Flood Caller like combo deck that uses a lot of weird synergies. There's a lot of weird things going on here. So, ideally, you get a card like Valley Flood Caller. 3 mana 2/2 flash. You can cast non-creature spells that add flash, whatever. But whenever you cast a non-creature spell, your birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. You untap them. All right. Then you got this card, Enduring Vitality. Essentially gives all your creatures the ability to tap to add 1 mana of any color. Of course, if it dies and it is a creature, it returns to the battlefield. Whatever. So essentially, you can make enough otters thanks to a card called Storm Chaser's Talent, where when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 otter. And Song of Totentans, which is like a card that like belongs in a precon.
Hang on. I want anyone to comment if they knew what this card did before this deck became a thing. And if anyone knew this card existed in Standard, I want to know why and how you knew that. Because I didn't know this card even existed in Standard until this deck became a thing. And the craziest thing about this is that it makes rats, which was like a key thing in Bloomburg, and was not printed in Bloomburg.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this card reads like it has been printed in Bloomburg, was not printed in Bloomburg.
Well, Bloomburrow, you casual.
Bloomburrow, sorry. Bloomburrow. Was not printed in Bloomburrow, and I had no idea this existed until this deck came a thing.
The crazy thing is, too, that this thing, by the way, you've run out of time to guess what this thing does. So it makes X 1/1 rats, so it's red and X. You make that many rats, and then creatures you control just gain haste. Like, not even rats you control, but your creatures gain haste. So even if you have a turn where, like, oh, I made like a few otters, I'll have to wait till next turn. If you have this, it doesn't matter. You can just give those creatures haste. So ideally, you get to a point where you can use a card called This Town Ain't Big Enough. It costs 5 mana, but it costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control, and you return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Target something your opponent controls, you target one of your things, ideally like Storm Chaser's Talent, and with enough creatures in play, plus a Valley Floodcaller, you can add a bunch of mana, cast a Storm Chaser's Talent, get a creature, and then level it up, buy back This Town Ain't Big Enough, bounce a Storm Chaser, bounce another thing. If you have a Up the Beanstalk, you can then start drawing cards to this loop too, and essentially get to a point where you have a bunch of rats / otters that are massive, and you could draw like a second song, play it for red or whatever, or even just make a bunch. Who cares at this point? You'll end up untapping all your creatures, you'll have your rats, and all your creatures will have haste. You deal a bunch of damage to your opponent.
Yeah, so with one song, 2 This Town Ain't Big Enough, and 1 Storm Chaser's Talent, you can essentially go infinite. And just a cute little heads up there. That you can go infinite with this combo.
Yeah, I mean, you essentially just end up netting enough mana to where, like, we're just going to make either a bunch of rats or have essentially infinitely big otters.
Well, your rats get pumped too.
Yeah, I mean, either way, like infinitely big creatures.
Yeah.
So pretty sweet, pretty interesting deck. How good it is, I have no idea. Honestly, every time that they've featured a deck like this, I've never really seen it go off, and I haven't really watched anybody play it that it ends up going off. But then people end up getting wins with it. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it's definitely a deck I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole. That's for sure. There's too much stuff going on here.
So, as someone who has watched this deck get played a lot and played against it some, I have a couple of different ideas and thoughts on this deck. One, I think this deck is very good. My problem is its plan B is hoping to draw into its plan A. It doesn't really have a good plan B. 2, every list I see plays 1 Screaming Nemesis in the sideboard, and I've yet to figure out why. I quite literally don't know what that card's for.
Yeah, I don't know why you would want, like, necessarily. Why would you care about your opponent not being able to gain life? Because I don't think there's any way to gain infinite life, and you can just make your things as big as you need them to. So I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
unless it's just a creature.
Yeah, I'm not sure why Screaming Nemesis is in here as just the one of in the sideboard. I've seen multiple lists with it, and I don't know. I don't understand that thought process. That being said, though, the deck is relatively cheap to build if it's something you want to get into. If you want to play this deck, you definitely need to goldfish it a bit, because there's definitely like some weird interactions that you just don't see all the time. This Town Ain't Big Enough is probably one of the most annoying cards to ever play against. Like the fact that it triggers Beanstalk, the fact that it's always cost 2 mana, just there's so many things it has going for it that it shouldn't seem as powerful as it does, and it just does some dumb things. It also works so well with Storm Chaser's talent, like it's just unreal. But the deck's really fun. It always looks fun to play. You do have some problems against the aggro decks for sure. Like I've definitely played against this mostly as playing with like the model like the red based aggro decks, and I kill my opponents a lot just as they're trying to set up. Like, oh, you're setting up, that's cool. Here's like 10 damage to the face. Like you need to figure out a way to stop this because they don't really have any ways to gain life in game one at all. Game two, they have like the secting tools is like their life gain, like wannabe Batterskull type creature. But it still costs 5 mana. Like it is just like the deck is weird to say the least. I definitely don't suggest you building this and then just going and playing it in RCQ. By any stretch of the imagination, this deck definitely takes some thought process for sure and like some tinkering. You're going to need to understand, why is there only 2 of this card? Why is there 1 of this card? Why are we only playing 3 of these? There's reasons for these numbers. Whether or not they're all correct, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to say they are. I have not put any work or time into this deck, so I'm not going to sit here and go, well, obviously it's usually be playing this many of this card. Not going to pretend to do that. I think that people who have been working on this deck have a thought process for sure. Whether their thought process is right, I don't know. But it definitely looks fun to play.
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean?
No one knows.
But that's just it's like worth. It's just a deck worth calling out. I mean, it's definitely fits the combo macro like archetype, and there's some very interesting ways that people have found ways to like go off from seemingly no board state. So I wouldn't even necessarily say it's like a critical mass deck that you build up over time, sort of kind of like you would see from like Yawgmoth and Modern, but it's definitely a deck that you have some spaces where it doesn't seem like you can go off, but you probably can find a way to go off.
Yeah, so I mean, just as a notate too, like, because I'm sure people are like, if you look at this deck or you're talking about this deck, well, it doesn't seem like it's really good. Like, so in the last standard challenge on the 22nd, so it put 5 copies in the top 32, taking 5th, 9th, 16th, and 17th. On the challenge on the 21st, it got 2nd, 3rd, and 22nd. And on the challenge on the 18th, it got 11th, 14th, and 24th. So, like, this deck is not a slouch. It's not just like, well, we see 1 copy living in at, like, the 32nd place. It's like, nope, this is taking 2nd and 3rd. Like, this deck is a real deck. So, don't be just swayed by the fact that I said it has, like, what I think is a bad aggro matchup. It is still very powerful. It's still doing well. Like, it's not just like, oh, well, once again, the Rug Combo deck came in at 32nd place, putting in 1 copy into the top 32. Like, it's like, nope, here's 4 or 5 copies in the top 32 at varying levels.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's probably good. I don't know if I'm willing to, I'm not willing to pick it up and try to play it. I'm just going to stick to what I know.
I will probably end up playing it at some point on Magic Online. Just to see. I'll run it through a league. I'll go 1-3 in the league. Talk about how bad this deck is, and then lose to it in all my RCQs.
Amen. I'll drink to that.
The Magic player way.
All right, we got one more deck to talk about, and we'll kind of wrap up what we got going on here. So the last one is a deck that was people were playing it in the lead up to Worlds, and there's a few good players that picked it up. And then it's kind of fallen by the wayside now, but it's still kind of a deck that you need to respect on multiple levels, and that's the Azorius Oculus.
Yeah.
Dakota, add a thunderstorm effect here. It's not happening. I'm not doing all that. Sorry for your loss.
So Azorius Oculus essentially was just the old like Picklock Prankster, Hottie Jin, Recommission, and Helping Hand style deck where like your whole goal was to put these three drops into the graveyard, buy them back that were value three drops essentially for less than 3 mana. So before it was Hadi Jin and Monastery Mentor. Then once we got a Horned Oculus, that kind of kicked out Monastery Mentor and took its place because it's just having a 5/5 flying creature that also manifests at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep is kind of broken.
Pretty good.
So, it did get a new card. It got Kiora, the Rising Tide, as a new creature from Foundations. So anyone who didn't read Kiora or kind of glossed over it, it's 2 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary creature. When it enters the battlefield, when it enters, draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. And then Threshold, so when it attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may create a Scion of the Deep, a legendary 8/8 blue octopus creature token. So not super broken, right? Not doing anything crazy, but it is a 3 mana Charter Course essentially that is also a 3/2 body. So not terrible. A lot of people compared this to Fable of the Mirrorbreaker for the longest time. They were arguing that this is like essentially a blue Fable, which I get what they're trying to say, right? It's a 3 mana spell. It lets you draw 2, discard 2, and it still has a body and it has some relevant text on the back end. I do not think you could remotely compare this to Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. Fable's a 10. This is like a 3 in comparison. Is this card like terrible? No, I don't think this card is nearly as terrible as a 3. But if you're going to compare it to Fable, that's where I'm putting. I'm putting Fable 10. This a 3, like all day.
Yeah, this is a solid card that maybe eventually sometime makes an 8/8. And I guess in some theoretical world, it does make an 8/8 on like turn 4.
Yeah, so I don't think this card's bad in the sense of like this deck does fill up his graveyard pretty fast. Between this itself, you're playing Picklock Prankster, the Free the Fae ability, milling 4 cards. You're playing Ops, Charter Course, Moment of Truth, Founding of the Third Path. Like you can get a lot of cards in your graveyard. It's not hard to get a velocity going by any means. So it's not too surprising to see this see play. I do think that like right now the deck list I'm looking at is when it went 7-2 in the SCG Con Columbus 10K. They were playing 2 copies, and I think that's probably where you want to be at with this deck is 2 copies. That would seem like a good number. It is a legendary creature. Notably too, this can help you like dig if you're really desperate, like you don't have anything else in your graveyard type thing. You can helping hand this back too, and it still helps you dig and get more velocity going. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of value to this card just existing in the deck. And I think it's a really good, pickup for this deck. The biggest problem or the biggest fault this deck truly has, it is terrible against the aggro decks. Like, I believe I played the Azorius Oculus deck either round 4 or 5, and I had about 40 minutes left in the round after our match was done.
Yeah.
It was not close. My opponent was sideboarding in 10 cards into their sideboard for me because their matchup was just that bad. And like we talked about it after the game, and he was talking about how it's not a good matchup for him as a whole. He figured that against against Gruul is the worst because they have like the protection spells. This is back at the beginning of Foundations before Boros was really gaining a lot of traction. He's like, against Gruul, he's like, it's like 70-30 in their favor. He's like, against you, I think it's closer to 60-50, and he goes, against Mono Red, it's like 50-50. He's like, but none of those matchups are just like, I'm happy to queue into you. And that's the biggest reason why I'm not playing this deck, to be honest. Now, do you have great game against the other mid-range decks? For sure. I do think the Caretaker's Talent deck is probably another bad matchup because a lot of their removal is Exile with those 4 laydown arms, which is huge because then you can't buy back your creatures. But, with the other black removal running around, there's not a huge amount of Exile going around. And, decks are playing some number of Graveyard Hate because of this deck. It is a very powerful deck. Now, you can beat the aggro decks for sure. I suggest you probably want to try to figure out, how you can shore those up in the sideboard games. And like game 1, obviously you can still do it if you get, an early Oculus going or something like that, where you have a big creature and you're forcing them to like kind of point burn spells at that instead, things like that, where you're putting them on the back foot a little bit. You can definitely gain traction and win those games. But I do think that this deck is super fun, super good. But it does it does have the issue of just not figuring out how to beat the aggro deck so far.
I would say a pretty good analysis of this deck. Just annoying, like very annoying to play against. Oculus is a heck of a magic card when you can kind of skirt the additional costs on there for a reason,
Yeah.
and
The fact that
that's
okay.
like the best creature. I mean, the best creature it got was printed in Duskmourn, and the fact that it kind of twofolds, you can either ditch the card into your graveyard that you can just get back with a helping hand or a recommission, or you just put the creature on the battlefield and then you can spend however much mana to like flip it up. And if it's like a Jin or something, or even like another Oculus, and you just attack with a 2/2, you can take out your opponent's biggest creature if they block with it, or if they don't block, you just end up getting like a ton of damage as well. And they just aren't really sure what it is until the thing happens.
The fact that Oculus flies too is just so like it's just so horrendous. Like I got to watch this deck literally live its dream life by going like turn one, like opt into turn two Charter Course into turn three Helping Hand, bring back a Horn Oculus holding up a negate. Like when you get to do that type of stuff, like you've just won the game. Like their opponent didn't have any chance. Like they had to play into the negate because like they have to make their opponent have it. They had to negate and then it just spiraled out of control from there. And like when you're getting to also then just like um look at the top two cards, hopefully pick a creature from that, and then just constantly get that roll going. Like you get so much value so fast. And we've already talked about earlier how there's not a lot of like mass removal spells running around. Like the Mono White Caretakers is like when that and Domain are the only decks really running board wipes. Like sure, there's like some Commander Gix running around, but like those are for like the small creatures. They're not for the 3-drops that this deck is playing. So like when you get an Horror Oculus to like last for like 2 turns, you've just like won the game right there. And it's so wild to me how well this deck does, essentially. And honestly, I think that this deck is just Spell Pierce getting printed into Standard away from being probably like a tier 3 deck. Like not tier 3, sorry. Like top 3 deck is what I meant. I meant to say top 3. I said tier 3, like way off course because I think I would argue this is like tier 1.5, tier 2 deck right now. And I think if Spell Pierce gets printed into the Standard, this immediately becomes a top 3 deck. Because Spell Pierce answers all the problems this deck runs into. It's just a cheap, efficient counterspell that it needs to deal with the removal.
Yeah, I could see it.
Like, I think for sure that is all this deck is missing is a Spell Pierce. And the moment Spell Pierce gets printed into Standard, you can just bet your money that this is the deck I'm playing.
Amen. I'm still not touching it with 10-foot pole, but I see
already
where
bought the
you're coming from.
Oculuses. I already bought the Oculuses. I'm ready. We're ready.
No, thank you. Oh, excuse me. Well, I think that basically covers, most of the standard metagame. Like, the decks that I think that you could, in those archetypes where you could convince me to kind of play any of those decks, they all have something kind of going on for them where it makes them good in the metagame or makes them good against certain decks in the metagame as well.
Mm-hmm. I would, I guess just real quick, like going over like kind of what I think are probably like the top 5 best decks to play. This is no inherent order by any means. I think you want to be playing either Dimir, Golgari, Boros, like the Boros Burn deck running around, the Jeskai Aggro deck, or Jeskai Convoke, whatever you want to call it, or the Caretaker Talent deck. Like I would put those as like the 5 best decks in the format right now, with Jeskai Convoke kind of being an underdog or almost sleeper at this point.
Yeah, I think I can kind of get behind those being the 5 decks. I think that for sure both mid-range decks are in there. They're single. That and then 2 different aggro variants are seeing like double-digit metagame levels of play over the last 30 days. But those 2 are just kind of in a tier of their own. Again, I personally like Dimir a lot better, but I think Dimir and Golgari being, probably 1 and 2, or like two of them being in the top 3 is like almost a guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Um,
I'm in agreement. I don't think I have like any objections to any of those picks. I think Jeskai Convoke and Caretaker's Talent, maybe depending on personal preference, you could probably interchange those, and I'm not necessarily upset with that either.
no, I would also argue too, like if you want to play like the Azorius Oculus deck, you want to play Domain, you want to play the Rug Flood Collar combo deck, you want to play, Mono Red Prowess instead of Burn, or you want to play, anything else. And it really like I'm not going to fault you for playing what you want to play by any means. I'm not saying that you can't take Gruul Delirium and win your RCQ by any means. Um, you definitely can. You see that you need to know what you need to have a game plan. Basically, is all I'll say is I think these are the decks you definitely want to have a game plan for. I think our top five is what you want to have a real game plan for. Like if you don't have a game plan for the Rug Flood Collar deck, that's probably fine. Depending on your RCQ will depend on if anyone's even playing that deck. You can definitely go to like 3 or 4 RCQs and not play that deck once. Same thing, you can go to an RCQ and play against Domain 4 times. There's no rhyme or reason. It's whatever that local meta is, whatever that like who decided to show up to the tournament. Whatever, whoever, what it is, what it is. That is, what you're going to end up playing against. You just need to be able to be prepared against like what we think are going to be the best decks. And clearly, Golgari and Domir are the 2 decks that I would for sure have a game plan for. They make up a lot of percentage of the meta. A lot of people like them. Standard is a relatively cheap format as a whole right now. You can build a lot of these decks for like $200-$300 max. Golgari's really cheap if you're not playing Shieldred. Like that's really the most expensive card in that deck by miles. Same thing with like Domir, and then really like if you already have like a land base or most of the land base, that's where like most of your money is for most of these cards anyway. Going through it, so like it's right now is probably the best time to play Standard. I think it's super healthy. We just like literally every metagame type is available right now. We have mid range, control, aggro, tempo, combo. Like you can't really ask for a healthier metagame for Standard than this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Standard's in a pretty good place, and definitely compared to, Modern, unfortunately being like the only other constructed format that we're going to have for at least the 2025-2026 year. Standard's going to be awesome, and I'm kind of dreading Modern up until ban announcement time.
Yeah, as it stands now, I haven't touched anything with Modern. I'm qualified for Charlotte. I plan to go to it, but I don't plan to play anything in Modern until at least December. Until the ban announcement happens and the format gets opened up to being like a real format. Hopefully. Hopefully Wizards doesn't fuck us.
But that's all I got. You have anything else you want to add, Randy?
No, I'm gonna do a shameless plug for my own channel if you made it this far. Modern Randy. I've been doing a metagame breakdown of over usually the last weekend. It comes out usually on Wednesdays. It does a breakdown of the last weekend from the challenges, any big events. So like I covered, the 10K at Columbus, what did well, what didn't do well, what we saw more of, or what we didn't expect to be in the top 8 type situation. Obviously, there's no covers of that, so there wasn't a whole bunch to go over, just kind of breaking down numbers. I've been breaking down the numbers, kind of trying to explain what we can, expect from this, what you can expect to see in your challenges, in your RCQs, things like that. So if you're trying to figure out what you want to play in Standard, what you want to do in Standard, what's going on in Standard, I suggest you check that out. That's my shameless plug for my channel.
Well, glad that you did half the job for me. So, yeah,
I'll make you plug your own.
No, if you made it this far, of course, make sure to leave a like on the video. Of course, subscribe to the Casual Spikes YouTube channel, and then of course to our channels as well, as they will be in the description down below. Mine, Karate23, Randy, Modern with Randy, all that fun, happy stuff. There's going to be a lot of Standard kind of coming up, just because again, that's going to be the RCQ season that we're going to have for quite a while, honestly, well into next year to hopefully qualify and make it to, I believe it's like the SCG Con in Minneapolis or Hartford, Connecticut. So, ideally qualifying for one of those. So, we'll kind of keep updates and tabs on the metagame and, make sure we kind of know what's going on to help you hopefully qualify for your regional championship. Yeah. But that's going to do it for me. I'm Dakota. That's Randy. This has been the Casual Spikes Podcast, episode 24, coming to a close. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next episode.
Bye.